Steve Hackett, the silent sound designer behind the Genesis empire. He was never featured on magazine covers or had a solo smash at the top of the Billboard charts. However, if you have ever been enthralled with Firth of Fifth or experienced music telling an unspoken tale, it's likely that you have heard Hackett's guitar without even recognizing it. With his tapping style in the 1970s, he was the first to introduce progressive rock guitar, even before Eddie Van Halen. He was the guitarist who contributed to the creation of several of Genesis' most famous albums, including Foxtrot, Selling England by the Pound, and The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. When the band was at its height, he quit. No tricks or scandals. In search of artistic freedom, Steve Hackett made the decision to quietly leave. And for almost half a century, he has pursued an incredibly stable, self-sufficient, creative career. As his former colleagues became stadium superstars, he dedicated his life to writing guitar symphonies that fuse prog rock, flamenco, and classical world music. Not for the general public, but enough to impress the discriminating listener. What then caused Steve Hackett, a rather quiet musician, to rise to prominence as one of the most important guitarists of the following generation? What caused him to leave the spotlight yet still leave an enduring legacy in classic rock history? And what is the true nature of his existence that inspired those strange and intellectual compositions? Let's find out in this early life video. Steve Hackett was born in the Pimlico neighborhood of central London on February 12, 1950, and was raised in a typical middle-class British household. During World War II, his father, Peter, worked as an advertising illustrator. June was his mother, a stay-at-home mom who had a strong passion for the arts. Even though there was no homelessness, violence, or poverty, the world was still too loud for a sensitive child like Steve. Too foreign, too practical. Being physically weak, sometimes sick as a child, disinterested in sports, and unable to fit in with his contemporaries, he started creating a new world in his own imagination. Even in elementary school, Hackett was engrossed in visual art, mythology, and adventure stories. His creativity was not limited to reading. In those realms, he lived. He had a survival instinct for music rather than a choice. He was self-taught and learned to play the harmonica at a very young age by using only repetition and a good ear. Subsequently, the recorder arrived, followed by the guitar, which would be his lifelong companion. He didn't fully fit into any social circle as a teenager. Long afternoons were spent sketching, playing chords, and attempting to imitate records by Bach, Segovia, and later blues greats like Robert Johnson or up-and-coming bands like King Crimson. He was remarkably gifted with the ability to hear and comprehend, a rare sort of oral intuition, despite having no academic instruction in music theory. "I didn't have many friends during this time, but I had a guitar, and it never made me feel lonely," Hackett once said. Steve envisioned himself performing music for the gods in an old castle, while others aspired to be football players, engineers, or television celebrities. Those dreams persisted over time. Rather, they served as the foundation for his later, profoundly cinematic, colorful, and bizarre music. There were no significant upheavals in Steve Hackett's early years, but it was the quiet, the limitless creativity, and the ongoing feeling of being unique. It created a unique musical identity and a life that follows its own rhythm indefinitely. Early career in 1970, Steve Hackett was a relatively unknown figure in the British music scene at the age of 20. He was having trouble finding a way to use his talent, having played guitar for a few small bands and performed in poorly lit pubs. In a desperate attempt, he ran a little advertisement in Melody Maker magazine. In order to push past the current static music forms, the guitarist looks for responsive artists. The lead singer of Genesis, a little-known progressive rock band, Peter Gabriel, received that meager, seemingly futile notification. There were no pyrotechnics or stage lights during Hackett's audition with the band. It was simply a plain room with a guitar singing something enchanted. "We knew Steve was something else from the first chord he played," said Tony Banks, the keyboardist for Genesis. Hackett formally joined Genesis within months after Anthony Phillips departed the group because of stage fear. With bands like Pink Floyd, Yes, and King Crimson defining the genre, the 1970s were the heyday of progressive rock. And Genesis' Fresh Edition helped it start to establish its own voice. Steve Hackett. Nursery Crime, 1971, was his first performance, but Foxtrot, 1972, and particularly Selling England by the Pound, 1973, were the shows that really brought out his full potential. Since then, his guitar solo in Firth of Fifth, which combines symphonic, legato, and tapping textures, has been praised as one of the most renowned solos in prog rock history. In contrast to many well-known guitarists, Hackett didn't perform to showcase his speed. He performed to convey tales. Every note evoked images of a different universe where mythology, tragedy, and fairy tales were all entwined. He became a special force in Genesis as a result, but tension also increased. Even with his contributions, Hackett felt his thoughts were being ignored more and more. Many times, his compositions were rejected or drastically changed. He once suggested a solo album while still with Genesis, and the internal dynamics of the group were rocked when Voyage of the Acolyte was released in 1975 to critical acclaim. Mike Rutherford and Phil Collins were publicly unhappy with Hackett's decision to become independent. After finishing the Wind and Wuthering album in 1977, Steve Hackett made the decision to depart Genesis. No farewell tour, no drama, just a quick note to the band. For me to be creatively free, I need space. It was a brave move to leave a band that was on the verge of becoming a household name. However, there was also the moment that revealed Hackett's own self, a resolute artist who never wavered from his own course. When he made the decision to start afresh, his actual career began. Professional achievement. Not only did Steve Hackett leave Genesis in 1977, but he also left behind a golden age that any rock artist would have wished to be a part of. At that point, Genesis was experiencing increasing mainstream success and was about to reach its commercial zenith. However, Hackett, who was naturally an artist, didn't want to be just another part of a quickly moving machine. He was drawn to unbridled inventiveness. In order to protect his creative spirit, he was prepared to forego popularity. In fact, he recorded his debut solo album, Voyage of the Acolyte, 1975, while he was still in Genesis. However, Hackett did not really discover his own voice until after his departure. Introspective and cinematic, the album was a fantasy symphony and is considered by many to be among the best solo progressive rock albums of the 1970s. Moreover, that was just the start. While many progressive rock musicians changed their styles to pop or vanished into obscurity during the 1980s, Steve Hackett remained true to himself. His albums include Spectral Mornings, 1979, Defector, 1980, and Highly Strung, 1983. They're all daring sonic experiments. He created soundscapes that transcended genres by fusing folk and electronic rock, flamenco, and classical music. Hackett became the eccentric in a world of music that was becoming more and more commercial, but he was the kind of eccentric that no one could ever replace. He suddenly joined together with Steve Howe of Yes to form the supergroup GTR in 1986. The single When the Heart Rules the Mind from their debut album, which debuted in the Billboard Top 20, had a more commercial bent. This was Hackett's first experience with mainstream popularity in America. He left the organization, however, a year later. For what reason? He did not want to become a diluted version of himself by writing to a quota. Hackett then pursued a completely independent course. He self-produced his CDs, started his own label, and planned his own tours. Despite their infrequent appearances on popular radio or television, projects like To Watch the Storms, Out of the Tunnel's Mouth, and Beyond the Shrouded Horizon were praised by critics. He maintained his audience, which is amazing. He created a loyal following instead, one that came to music to listen intently rather than for light entertainment. The Genesis Revisited series, which Hackett started in 1996, aims to bring back the great works of Genesis from a contemporary perspective. Dancing with the Moonlit Night and Watcher of the Skies were reimagined in a whole new way with a fresh band, excellent musicianship, and matured feeling. Over the course of 25 years, Hackett traveled the world on the Genesis Revisited tours, introducing a new generation of listeners to his crucial contribution to Genesis history. His conceptual semi-autobiographical album, The Circus and the Night Whale, was released in 2024 when he was 74 years old. It tells the tale of a young boy named Travela who enters a magical world, faces evil, and finds who he really is. According to many, it is Hackett's musical autobiography, a concluding statement that he has never abandoned his passion, rather, he has merely decided to pursue it more slowly, deeply, and honestly. Steve Hackett's influence is evident in every note he has ever played. He never required the limelight to make an impression. One straightforward truth, which is rarely lived, is demonstrated by his career. The only requirement for art is that it be honest, it need not be simple to comprehend. Hackett has been completely loyal to that personal life for his entire life. If Steve Hackett's career is a symphony that floats through many genres and emotions, then his private life is a soft tune that is both quiet and full of painful low notes. There are no scandalous affairs, addiction stories, or public financial struggles. He never gave his private life to the tabloids. That does not, however, imply that it was devoid of unfortunate turns. Kim Poor, his first wife, was not only his lifelong companion but also a close artistic colleague. Hackett was establishing his solo career when they first met in the late 1970s. Brazilian painter Kim created most of Hackett's record covers for more than 20 years, giving his songs a surreal and very innovative visual character. The two were regarded as one of rock's unique creative couples, where creating art was a deep connection between two souls rather than merely a source of desire. However, the marriage terminated in secret after more than 20 years of marriage. No clamorous judicial cases or revealing press interviews took place. Just like Steve Hackett left Genesis, they slipped out of one another's lives without any fanfare or public sorrow, but not without leaving deep wounds. He once described the divorce as a rough time that I could only deal with through music. His subsequent albums did, in fact, have a more somber and melancholy tone. As though conversing silently with himself. Jo Lehman, Hackett's second wife and the songwriter for many of his songs after 2009, was someone he met after the divorce. The chemistry wasn't nearly the artist couple image Joe had with Kim Poor, and he hardly ever appeared in front of cameras. However, she was instrumental in reviving Hackett's creative spirit and emotional equilibrium. They toured and lived a peaceful, deeply rooted life together. As though, after years of emotional adrift, Hackett had at last discovered a quiet harbor. The fact that Steve Hackett is childless is another noteworthy aspect of his personal life. He previously acknowledged in an interview that his dedication to music left him with no time for parenthood. He knew that raising a child required his whole attention, which he was unable to provide while on the road and recording for months at a time. This was not because he didn't want to, but rather because he realized it. Without any scandals, betrayals, or PR stunts, Hackett's private life is quiet and serene, yet incredibly introspective and steadfast. Every note Hackett plays bears the stamp of love once shared, anguish once borne, and truths never uttered aloud thanks to his decision to let love fuel his craft in a world where artists frequently trade love for prosperity. Influence and legacy. Steve Hackett's name frequently appears in the annals of classic rock history behind more instantly identifiable icons like Ritchie Blackmore, David Gilmour, and Jimmy Page. To those who are genuinely interested in progressive music, however, Hackett is more than just a historical figure. It was he who made a whole new guitar language possible. Silent, weird, multidimensional, and abstract. His invention of the two-handed tapping method, which was recorded as early as the early 1970s and long before Eddie Van Halen made it popular all over the world, is among his biggest contributions. Hackett blended cello-like phrasing and legato with tapping in his famous solo on the Firth of Fifth, changing the guitar from a shouting instrument to one that tells stories. Later generations admired him as a silent hero, but he never developed the persona of a guitar hero. In one instance, Steve Rothery of Marillion referred to Hackett as a guiding beacon, while Brian May of Queen termed him a bringer of refined beauty to progressive guitar. Hackett's effect on musical structure and harmonic reasoning has been openly acknowledged by bands such as Dream Theater, Opeth, Riverside, and Steven Wilson. The universe that Hackett creates with his music is what really sets him apart, even beyond his skill. Because Hackett's work does not fall into any one genre, it is impossible to define exactly. It is a fusion of electronic rock, raw blues, and European classical South American folk. All filtered via an introspective, inquisitive, and ever-changing soul. A significant aspect of his legacy is undoubtedly his dedication to the arts. In contrast to many of his contemporaries, Hackett stuck to himself, even if it meant falling behind the commercial market. However, it was precisely because of that tenacity that he became an indispensable figure to progressive music fans. He was still giving full 10-minute epic performances in his 60s. In his 70s, he put out new albums because he still had something to say, not to remind people that he was still alive. He is still committed to Genesis Revisited as a quest to regain his proper position in the band's history, and at the age of 74, he keeps going on unrelenting tours. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inducted Genesis in 2010. Despite no longer playing with the band, Steve Hackett took the stage to accept the honor, amid the cheers of people who would never forget him. But honors were never the most important thing to Hackett. His true legacy resides in the thoughts of people who have listened to him perform and discovered a different universe where strings control emotions. In a time when minimalism and noise are popular, Steve Hackett took a different approach. Intricacy, abstraction, and the need for attentive listening. With a guitar voice that has endured, he undoubtedly established a different era even though he was not the most well-known performer of his era. The present. Despite being 74, Steve Hackett has never indicated that he plans to retire. Music isn't a phase to him. It is an approach to life, a way of understanding it, and a way of just existing. Hackett is still touring, writing, and inspiring, one note at a time, while many of his contemporaries have long faded into the background. And 2024 to 2025 are compelling evidence of that unwavering spirit. His most recent studio album, which is highly personal in character, The Circus and the Night Whale, was published in February 2024. This was an artistic statement rather than a retort. Through the character Traveler, Steve describes a journey of self-discovery, progress, and darkness. The album, which combined progressive rock, world music, classical music, and dramatic soundscapes, confirmed Hackett's unwavering artistic vision amid a musical landscape that is becoming more and more flat and predictable. From 2024 to late 2025, Hackett embarked on the Genesis Greats, Lamb Highlights, and solo tour in addition to his new compositions. The tour is more than a commemoration of Broadway's 50th anniversary, it is a declaration of purpose. Hackett doesn't dwell on the past in order to satisfy his nostalgia. He gives it new life by bringing in a new generation of listeners, fresh emotion, and contemporary vitality. With stops in Europe, Japan, and North America, and many of them selling out well in advance, the tour is proof of his continued popularity among progressive rock fans around the world. Apart from the tour, Hackett also participated in the Cruise to the Edge event in April 2025, which was a music cruise for lovers of prog. There, he offered workshops on creativity and music, met fans, and exchanged anecdotes. Steve Hackett's life now isn't centered on drama or celebrity. He spends his days making music, reading, walking, and playing the guitar as a kind of meditation. He and his wife, Jo Lehman, reside in England. He frequently posts behind-the-scenes tour videos, impromptu studio moments, and sporadic philosophical musings on social media. In every way, he stays loyal to himself as an artist who is profound rather than ostentatious. Someone who stays close to his audience's hearts rather than following trends. In 2024, he had to postpone a performance in Phoenix due to a case of bronchitis. However, he made a triumphant comeback to the stage a few weeks later, serving as a silent reminder to his admirers that genuine enthusiasm is unaffected by age, illness, or hardship. Today's Steve Hackett has no intention of reliving his past or remaining youthful. He moves slowly, thoughtfully, and at his own pace, but he never stops moving. The ability to keep growing without having to achieve new heights is perhaps the most obvious sign of a great artist. It was never Steve Hackett who was the star of the show. His reputation was established without the need for ostentatious attire, high-profile controversies, or number-one songs. But with each note he played in each intricate and poignant arrangement, he subtly cemented his reputation as a great storyteller in music history. Via strings, through quiet, and through steadfast belief. For more than half a century, Hackett never took the easy route. In search of artistic freedom, he left a band at the height of its popularity. In favor of lengthy, complex compositions that were never easy to understand but were always honest, he rejected commercial formulas. And he came to terms with being underappreciated and ignored so long as he didn't turn on himself. Not just artists made that decision. Someone who had a profound understanding of what was most important adopted this life stance. Identity. Hackett's legacy is not embodied by statistics or awards. It resides in his subdued impact on upcoming musicians. In his stability at times of change. I think music doesn't have to follow trends. It just needs to appeal to the emotions. While many well-known names have faded or become gone, Hackett is still around today. He goes on tour, releases CDs, and brings fresh vitality to the songs he created 50 years ago. What do you think about Steve Hackett's continuing, unique artistic journey, not to hold on to past greatness, but to demonstrate that true principles never go out of style if you're brave enough to live them fully? Which of his creations most deeply resonated with you? Please leave your comments below, and remember to hit like and subscribe so that we can keep discovering the tales of musicians that live authentically, profoundly, and musically. Thank you for viewing, and I hope to see you again soon.